In this session, what we're going to do is go over how you're going to do your written diet evaluation. We've went over your diet data, so we've made sure that it was correctly inputted and you have the correct information. And now our goal is to analyze that and evaluate how we're doing. But we are not going to write this to get a balanced diet. That would be impossible in the time we have. What we're basically going to do is have you look and compare foods to nutrients. That's the basic thing. As you notice when you're doing your diet data input of foods, sometimes you couldn't find the foods. Sometimes the foods didn't match what you ate. So it would be impossible to get a balanced intake and try to do that and manipulate everything, because and even if your food intake and what you put into the NutriCalc program was correct, it would be impossible because for example, if you said, well, I'm low in carbohydrates, so I'm going to add bread um, to increase my carbohydrates. Well, basically, that's going to change every single nutrient that you ate. You'd have to go through and reevaluate your vitamins and your minerals and your protein and everything. So every time you added a new food, you would have to reevaluate the whole food intake, and that it would be ridiculous. So what we're going to do is basically just go through and first of all just look at each nutrient individually. We're going to make changes to try to meet goals for that nutrient. Then when we go on to the next nutrient, we're going to basically act like we did nothing and just work on that. So we're going to look at each individual nutrient um, and just balance it, and then go on and balance the next one, acting like we did nothing. Uh, Another thing that we'll hope to get out of this is to understand the nutrient goals. So after you get through, you should be able to have a better handle on what are the goals for the vitamins, the carbs, the lipids, the sodiums, and all that kind of stuff. That would be an important piece. Um, and then the hope is that you won't have to make any major changes in what you normally eat. The hope is that you can use foods that you normally eat and make subtle adjustments to those, increasing, decreasing serving sizes to meet the goals. One of the biggest drawbacks of individuals who change their diet is they take away foods they enjoy, or they try to go onto some diet plan that totally revamps everything they normally eat, and it doesn't work. I mean, you've known people who've done that many different ways. They've been on several different diet plans, and they last about a month, and then they say this is ridiculous. I don't even like it. I don't enjoy it, and they go back to the way they normally eat. Well, why don't we just stay the way we normally eat and make adjustments within the foods that we normally eat? As we've said throughout the whole term so far, is that you can eat anything you want. It's just moderation and balance and those kinds of things. Can you have ice cream? Well, sure, but you can't eat ice cream every day, and you can't eat bulk amounts of it. But you can still have ice cream, and so the idea would be that if you like ice cream, but you need to make an adjustment to that. Instead of eating 2 cups, maybe you could just eat 1 cup of ice cream per day. Well, you've cut half the amount of calories, half the amount of fat, sugar, so forth down. That's a victory. You've adjusted your intake downward by half, and you're more likely to stick with that meal plan because you still get to enjoy what you enjoy instead of taking it away. So let's go through, and I'll try to do the best that I can. This is not something you'd want to put off to the last minute. It is a time-consuming exercise. You need to work on it a little bit each week. Um, and try to get through it, and then you'll get done. So you have about 5-6 weeks to get her done, but I wouldn't wait till the last week, because by that time you're going to forget everything and you're going to have to start over and you're going to be asking me questions. I don't remember why we did this kind of thing. But hopefully this video you'll be able to watch several times, maybe or this audio, and be back in track. But it does take some time, so do not put this off till the last minute. Start this week and start going just a little bit at a time, and then you'll have it done by the end. Okay, so what we're going to be using is, you're going to need your all daily reports page. That's why I said you should print it off, because you're going to need that information. There are instructions on how to do the diet evaluation, so you need to read through those. And then there is an example paper that was written by a former student that would be the format with how I would like you to put this together. I can't have all of you writing in your own creative way, putting this together. I need you all to use the same format. So what I need you to do is to look at this example paper and basically follow. You could even use it as a template. Just take out her numbers and put in your own numbers and change the foods and stuff, but just use her format. So just copy that and save it as a Word document, and then just go over and change the wording, but use the same format. So those are the three things that you'll have available, plus this audio to help you do it. So here's your bar graph, and basically your bar graph is going to have the value column, which is what you ate. This is your intake. And then the DRI goals, this column is basically what are, a lot of them are DRIs, but as you know, not everything has a DRI. So it's going to be recommendations, but based on who you said you were. So based on your age, based on your height and weight and sex and activity level and that kind of thing. This DRI goal is going to be set for who you said you were. All right. And so anyway, what we're going to do is, compare what you take to the DRI goal in most cases and see how you fit. And then if you didn't meet the goal, if you're at a certain percentage over or under the goal, then you'll have to make adjustments to that in order to meet the goal. But we're just going to go nutrient by nutrient. The other sheet you'll need is down at the bottom after the spreadsheet's down. It's one of the last pages is calories and fat. Especially we're going to be looking at sources of calories, because that's going to dictate whether we have to make adjustments or not. So anyway, so where we're going to start is looking at the carbohydrates. So we're going to use that bar graph and the calories from fat, and we're going to use the U.S. Senate goals of 1977 that we previously introduced, and we're going to see how we meet the goal of having a total carbohydrate intake at a 58%, with 48% or close. We want 48% or above of what we're going to call complex carbs and natural sugars. And then we want 10% or below of what we're going to call refined sugars, which would basically be added sugars. So then we're going to use this, and then to make our changes and what kind of foods we would need to adjust, we're going to be using the spreadsheets that you have within your all daily reports. So let's go through and see if I can help clear up how we are going to do our carbohydrates. There is a lot of math to this, a lot of calculations to do, so I'll do my best to try to explain them, but I'm always available if this doesn't make sense. So the first thing we're going to do, again, our goal is to be at 58% total carbohydrate. Well, and these are my numbers. I'm at 59%, which is good. But where we're heading is, the problem is, okay, yeah, I can meet the goal of total carbohydrates, but that doesn't really tell me how much of this 59% came from refined sugars and how much came from complex. Because if I'm at 59%, but 30% is from refined sugars, that's not good. Even though I met the total carbohydrate, I didn't meet the goal of 10% or less from refined sugars. So where did they get 59%? I mean, where did they get that number? I'm just going to show you. Basically what they did was they took your carbohydrates gram number times 4. Remember, there's 4 calories per gram. And then so they multiplied 4 times this number divided by your total calories, and that gave us the 59%. You notice I have these crossed out because I don't want you to do this percentage. We don't want to use these. So you can go ahead on your sheet and just cross these out, or somehow just eliminate those, because we're not going to use those percentages. We're going to use the percentages on the calories and fat page. So anyway, this number times 4 divided by total calories gives us 59%. Okay, and so this kind of shows kind of how we also got that, because we have to take fiber into consideration. But so we had 353.8 for minus 8.26. I kind of went through and trying to figure out how in the heck they determined, the 59%, because I couldn't figure it out. Because first of all, I took the 28, because fiber doesn't give you any calories. So we're looking at calorie intake. And as you know, as you see, these don't match. I mean, this is like 8.29 or 26 or whatever, and this is 28. So do not trust the total fiber amount. We're not even going to use that. I mean, we're going to use the total. We're not going to use this, because obviously some foods in the database they don't have fiber for. So, but this was used, and I did a lot of math trying to figure out where in the heck. And so they actually used these numbers. So that's where I got the 8.26. I added those together. So if you take the total carbohydrates minus the fiber, these would be the actual grams of carbohydrates that give you calories. So we took this number times 4. I'm sorry, I was wrong earlier. We take this times 4, gave it this number, divided by 2326 gives us 59%. You don't need to show these calculations when you do your written thing. I'm just going to assume that you did them correctly. So there's no use, unless you really want to list these down. So my 59% matches my 58% goal. And so I don't have to make any changes here. But again, I don't know how much was complex and how much was refined. So first of all, let's look at the refined and see where I'm at there. So our goal is to be a 10%. If we're above 10%, we're going to have to lower it to 10% or below. If you're below 10%, you don't need to raise it unless you really want to. I've had students that were at 5% refined sugars, and just for giggles, I guess, they decided, well, I'm just going to add some sugar just to see how much I can actually eat and still be at 10% or below. So they added some candy or drink soda or something in order to get it up to 10%. So I mean, it's just an interest of theirs, and I don't care. But if you're at 5%, you can leave it at 5%. The only issue is, though, if you're at 5%, your complex are going to have to be at 53, because you still need to meet the 58% goal. Anyway, so we're gonna say refined foods with refined sugars are going to be anything that has basically added sugar. So desserts that you have, so it's kind of tough though. If you have cake, you're going to have to make some kind of adjustments there, maybe, and determinations, because if you have cake that has added sugar or cake that has icing on it, only part of that cake is refined and some of it is complex natural sugar kind of thing. So you're just going to have to maybe make a management decision about, well, okay, how much is actually refined sugar out of the sugar, how much is actually refined and how much is natural, especially if you add fruit to something, that kind of thing. So you just may have to take a stab at it and look at it. But what I want you to know is this number here, we know it contains the fibers, but it also includes both the refined sugars and the complex and natural sugars. Okay, so this is the total carbohydrate. So what you're going to need to do to determine your refined sugars is go into your spreadsheets. So you should have a spreadsheet. In your spreadsheet, you should have a column for sugar. You should have a column for carbohydrate. And so as you can see, if we look at the Pepsi, Pepsi is 41 under total, but it's also 41 sugar. It's all sugar. So, this column includes everything in this column. So this is total carbohydrate. These are sugars. But again, we're only going to count the added sugars. So what you're going to have to do is go through each of your foods and determine if it has refined sugars or natural sugars kind of thing. So milk, has lactose in it. Yes, it is a simple sugar, but I'm not going to have you reduce your milk intake to reduce your sugars. I'm more interested in the added refined type of sugars. So the lactose in milk would be a natural sugar. The same thing as the fructose in bananas. That would be a natural sugar. But soda is added sugars, and then the added sugars per peach pie. I mean, you could make an argument that these sugars maybe came from the fructose and peach as part of them. If you want to do that, that's fine. I chose to just say that they were all added sugars, kind of thing. The rest is going to be the dough that makes the crust and all that kind of stuff. So I chose to say it was all added. So what I did was put 41 plus 7 basically is I had a total of 48 grams for this day of added refined sugars. Okay, so I would do that for each day. Say this was day 1. I would do the same thing for day 2 and the same thing for day 3. Okay, so I just arbitrarily came up with some numbers. So my day 1 was 48 grams, and I said, well, I ate more sugar on day 2 and day 3. So I had 115 grams of refined, 102. Well, we're going to get an average. So we add those up and divide by 3. So I came up with an 88 gram average of simple sugars. Well, if you take that times 4, gives me 352 calories. And if I divide the 352 by my total calories, I get 15.1%. Well, that's over my 10% goal. So what I have to do then is I'm going to have to reduce those refined sugar foods and get it down to 10%. Okay. Well, first of all, I have to determine, well, what in the heck is 10%? How many grams is 10%? Well, what you would do is basically take your total calories, because this is 15% of my total calories came from simple sugars. So I would take my total calories times 0.1, which is 10%, which gives me 232 calories. But if I want to get into grams, there's 4 calories per gram. So 232 divided by 4 gives me 58. So 58 grams represents 10%. I'm now at 88. I need to get it down average to 58. That doesn't mean every single day has to be 58. My average over the 3 days needs to be 58. So I'm just going to make changes to that. So for example, I wouldn't change day 1, right? because it's below 58 already. So just I would not make any changes to day one. So basically, this is the format that I would want you to use. This is the format that you'll see in the student paper. And this is the format you'll see that I'm requesting in the instructions. Is basically you're telling me, okay, right now I'm at 88 grams or 15%. My goal is to be at 58 or 10%. Okay. So 48 is below, so I make no changes to day one. But on day two, I had some ice cream and some Pepsi. Okay. So I had 115 grams. So if I delete a half a gram, I get 22 plus 40, 66. So 150, 15 minus 66 is close to 53. Okay, anyway, I guess I need to work on my math too. Anyway, I think you get the idea. And then on day two would be that 34 grams of my brownie, and then it gives me 68. So what I've basically done is I've listed my original intake, what changes I'm going to make, and then I'm going to my new intakes, and then I'm going to show at the bottom that I met my goal. So 48 plus 50 for 68 divided by 3 gives me a 56 gram average. So I'm actually under the 58 gram goal, which is okay. So I'm now, if I made these changes, I'm now at 9.6%. So I've met my goal of being 10% or less. Okay? Now let's look at our complex natural sugars. We want them to be 48% or above, but we don't want to go over 62%. Okay, total carbohydrates. So anyway, what we would do then is we're going to determine, okay, where we are now and then where we need to be to meet our goal. So again, we had a total intake of 353.84. And if you remember, we said that this column includes this. So we're going to have to subtract out our simple sugars. And so what I've determined here is what my goal is. So my goal is 48%. Okay. So I take my total calories times 0.48, which is 48%. And I get this many calories divided by 4 calories per gram. That gives me a goal of 279 grams for complex and natural sugars. Okay? So, what I'm going to do then is I've got 354 grams here. All right, I ignore this here. This is something's goofy. I just forgot to make changes, but anyway. Oh, I guess I didn't. This is where I'm at. So where I ended up with was 290 grams or 50%. This is how I got there. So I had my original 354 that we had on you saw on the all data reports of the graph. We determined we have 56 grams of refined sugars. Again, we go back up here. We had a total of 56 grams of refined sugars. Okay, so we subtract those out. Remember at the very beginning we had about 8 grams of fiber. So we subtract out the fiber, which gives us 290 grams of complex. So if we take 290 grams times 4, we would get about 1160. So we take 1160 divided by our total calories, and we get about 49.8 or 50%. So I basically met my goal. I don't have to make any changes in my complex because I've met the goal. And I will show that we met the goal. So 49.8 plus 9.6% is 59%. And we've met the goal of 58%, but less than 62% total carbohydrates. So I'm done with the carbohydrates now. I don't have to make any changes. So basically what you would say in your written report is for complex natural sugars, you would just basically say my 3-day average intake was 290 or 50%. I need to make no changes. I have met the goal of 58%, and then you would show, okay, I had 49.8% complex, I had 9.6 simple, and I've met my goal. And so again, you don't have to make the table and show that you didn't make any changes. You just report that you met the goal. All right. So that'll take a little bit of time, a little bit of math, but hopefully that helps. Let's just say that you have a low complex carb scenario. I just make this up. Let's say that our total carbohydrates was 46%. And then we determined that our complex was 36, but our refined was 10. So we don't need to make any changes in refined, but we do need to increase this 36% up to 48%. So basically, what we would do is go into this column here, and we would basically want to increase our total carbohydrates. So we would choose carbohydrates that are not refined. And basically what you want to do is go through your column, and I would choose the carbohydrates that are the highest in gram. In this case, it was whole wheat bread. You could have chosen the rice too, because it's very high. But I wouldn't choose tomatoes because it would take a lot of tomatoes to make a difference. So just choose foods that you normally eat and make adjustments. So we're at 285 first, and then we're going to add some bread because it's 47. So again, if we go back, we saw it was 47. So if we add 2 slices, we would get 335. And then we make changes. And I just made these up, but we made changes here, here, and here, and do that. And we added them up, and so we made these changes. So here's an original intake, what our changes are, new intake. We added them up, divide by 3, 341, or that represents 48%. So then we would just show we met the 58% goal. All right. So the same format is just showing that you're going to increase your complex carbohydrates. Now let's go into the lipids. The lipids, our goal is to be 30% or below with lipids. If your fat total is above 30%, and we will see this when we go for the calories and fat page, then you need to reduce these down to being 10% each. What we want to do is have all of your different fatty acids, basically your saturated, your monounsaturated, your polyunsaturated, 1/3 of your total intake. That's going to be our goal for this paper. Okay, so that if you're above 30%, then you're going to reduce your total intake down to 30%, with each of them being 10%. Now, personally, I wouldn't worry about the total. I would work on the individual fatty acids, because once you get them down to 10% each, then you will automatically be at 30%. So don't worry about adjusting your total fat. Just adjust each individual fatty acid, and then you will meet the goal that way. If you're below 30%, I'm not going to ask you to raise it. What I'm going to do is just, if you're at 27%, then each of your fatty acids would need to be 9%. If you're at 24%, they both need to be 8% each. So don't raise it to 30 unless you really want to. Just keep what you have, and each individual one would be 1/3 of that total percentage. So where you're going to find your percentages on this calories and fat page, and in my scenario, I'm at 25%. So basically thinking, if I divide this by 3, each of my individual fatty acids would need to be right around 8% or 8 point something percent. I'm not expecting you to get exactly 8.6% or something, but close, so that, if you're at between 24 and 26 when you add them up percent, that's fine. But if I look at where I'm at now on my individual ones, this one's at 9%, so a little bit high. This one's only 5, and this one's 4. And then you're looking at this and you're saying, well, 9 plus 4 plus 5 does not equal 25%. Okay, Basically, it's kind of the same scenario as the fiber. They in the program, there's some issues with the type of fat. So you'll notice this NA fat, non-accounted for fat. Well, we're just going to include that in the total. And so basically our goal is to meet this 25% goal with 1/3 of each of these being, or if you want to look on this side, each of them should be 33%. If we said this was 100% of the fat intake, then each of these would be 33%. But I think it's easier just to say, okay, this is 25% of my total calories, so I need 8, 8, 8 would be 24. So I'm going to make adjustments here to get these up to where, or down to where they need to be. So how did they get those percentages? Again, what they did was they took these numbers times 9, okay, because there's 9 calories per gram, and divided by total calories. So if we take 23.03 times 9 and then divide by this, it'll give us 9%. Okay. So basically, you'd want to, if you're above 30%, then you'd want to determine, well, what is 10%? So if you're at 36%, you want to get each of your fatty acids down to 10%. So what is 10%? Again, what we're going to do is take our total calories, because it's 10% of total calories, times 0.1 or 10%, give us this. But instead of dividing by 4 like we did with carbohydrates, we need to divide by 9, because there's 9 calories per gram. So that gives us a goal of 25.8 grams for each of the fatty acids. So you'd make adjustments to get each of them to this amount. Okay. If you're below 30%, like mine was 25%, then you divide 25. So it's pretty close to 8%. So we're going to try to get each of our fatty acids to 8%. Well, what is 8%? Well, 23 times 8% gives us this. So we're looking to be at pretty close to 20 to 21 grams for each of the fatty acids. So where are we now? This is 23. So we need to get this down to about 20. We need to get this up to about 20, or we could say between 20 and 21. We need to get this 9 up to around there, so that they're all basically 20 grams, because then that would make each of them right around 8% or so. Okay, so that's our goal. So what we're going to do is, again, you're going to go in your spreadsheets, and you will have a column for each of these fatty acids, and you will have a total down here for each of them. So what your goal is going to be very similar to where we did with refined sugars and the complex, is you want your average to be 20. Okay. In this case, we didn't have very many grams, but we're going to make adjustments, because obviously this was a low day, because we ended up with like 23 grams or something. So obviously day 2 and day 3 were very high fat. And remember, when we did our calculation, we had ice cream and we had brownies and stuff. So on day 2 and day 3, so that's where it is. Excuse me. But so anyway, again, each individual day doesn't have to be 20 grams. You need your average to be 20 grams. So you're just going to make adjustments by choosing foods that you're going to increase or decrease to get up to 20 grams. Now, don't be surprised. Again, we need to take each of these fats individually. So we're going to basically act like we don't see these. We're going to work on saturated, and we're going to make adjustments to do that. But what you'll notice is that potato chips are high in saturated mono and poly. So we were looking that we're going to reduce our saturated, because it was a 23 gram average, and we're get it down to 20, but we're going to increase our mono. So don't be surprised in this situation. I would reduce my potato chips to get my saturated, but I would increase my potato chips to get my mono. That's why I say for this project, we're not looking at balancing a diet. We're looking at Where do our nutrients come? So this basically shows you that potato chips are high in all fats, right? So just make adjustments to saturated and get that done. So you get it at 10% or wherever you're at, 8% that you need to be. Go do your mono, act like you did nothing. Act like you didn't make any changes at all, and then make adjustments to this and make adjustments to this. Again, we're forcing you to look at what foods you eat are high in the fatty acids, not to get a balanced diet. Okay? So work each of these individually, and every time when you get done with saturated, go to mono and act like you did nothing and just start all over and make adjustments to it. Then when you go to poly, act like you did nothing, start over and from the beginning and just make adjustments until they're all at your goal amount. Okay? Proteins, now the lipids and carbs are the hardest for doing calculations. So once you get through those, it's kind of downhill. Our goal for protein is 12%. That's from the U.S. Senate goals. The only time I would expect you to make adjustments to your protein is if you're above 20%. If you're above 20%, I need you to get it down to 12. If you're below 20%, you don't need to make any adjustments to your total protein. And if you make adjustments, it'd be the same process that we went through before. Go to the column for protein and go through the 3 days and make adjustments by changing your food intake and dropping whatever's high in protein to get it down to 20% or 12%. Now again, how would you find 12%? Take your total calories times 0.12, get your total calories or your calories from protein, divide by 4 calories per gram. That'll tell you how many grams represents 12%. All right? But even if you don't make any changes in total protein, I want you to determine how much of your protein comes from an animal source, how much comes from a plant source. This would be a good indication of where most of your food is coming from, whether it's an animal or plant source. Our goal should be to get 40% of your intake from an animal source and 60% from a plant source. That would be a goal. I mean, more plant, I mean, obviously 80-20 animal would be better, but our goal is 60 animal, 40, 40 animal, 60. Don't be surprised if you're just opposite. Most of my students are between 60 and 80% animal and 40 to 20% plant. That's the rule of thumb. So don't be surprised if you get that, you're normal, I guess, for American. But anyway, so what you're going to do is you're going to have to go through your protein section of your spreadsheet and determine how many foods were plant and how many animals. So you're going to go through the 3 days and just determine how much was animal, how much was plant. So here's where you'd find your total, again, under calories and fat. So if you're above 20, you have to reduce it. If you're at 16, you don't have to reduce your total, but you still have to determine how much was animal, how much was plant. So basically, you go through your protein columns in your 3 days. You just go through the foods and say, well, how much was from an animal source, which ones were from a plant source. If it was me, if I knew I ate more plants than animals, I would just choose to do the animal one because that would be less number. And if I ate more animal, I would do the opposite. But in this case, basically what you do is I just chose to do the animal. So there's this plus this plus this gives me this much. If I take 85.21 minus 49.54, that gives me the plant. So you don't have to add them both, just add one and subtract from the total, because this total equals plant and animal together. So in this scenario, basically I've got 49.54 grams from an animal source and 35.67. So you would do that for each day, and then once again get the average. So in my scenario, I'd take 49.54 plus whatever I got for day 2 plus what I got for day 3, add those together, divide by 3, to get an average. Then it's very simple, because what you can do is once you get your average of animal, go up here. This is your total grams, 92.4. So just take your average grams of animal, divide by, in my case, 92.4 times 100 would give you how much percentage average you got from an animal source, and just subtract that from 100%. So for example, if my percentage was 70% animal, then obviously 30% came from a plant source. So I was 70% animal, 30% plant. Okay, so that's pretty simple calculation. Again, add up day, I mean, you can do either animal or plant, but in this case I did animal. Add up your animal, day 1, day 2, day 3, divide by 3 to get an average. You don't have to convert it into calories or anything. Go back up to your calories and fat, look at your total intake of protein, divide that average of animal by your total, get a percentage, subtract that percentage from 100%, and you've got your plant percentage. Okay. The other thing I haven't mentioned yet is if you look in your instructions and also the student example, starting with the lipids, it asks you to list your 3 highest foods with saturated, mono, and poly. In this case, it also asks you 3 highest in animals. So in this case, my 3 highest would be milk, ham, chicken. But you're going to look over your 3 days and just pick the 3 highest for the 3 days. Not the top 3 for each day, but the total 3 days, what were your highest. So do that for your lipids. Don't have to do them for carbs, but for your lipids and for starting with the proteins, you're going to separate those out. Now we get to the essential nutrients. Basically, there's only 8 that I want you to really pay attention to. These are the ones that have been shown to have some deficiencies. What we're looking at, and this is where we are going to use the DRI goals, is we're looking for nutrients that are below 75% or above the tolerable UL. Okay. Most cases, there's not really I've never had a student that was above the UL, which is 10 times the RDI or RDA or DRI. I'm sorry, DRI. But what you're mostly is below the 75%. Okay. If you're below the 75%, your goal is to meet the 100% goal. It's very easy to see that goal. So anyway, and what you're going to do is, again, you're just going to go through each day and make adjustments if necessary to meet that 100% goal. So here's going to be the percentages we're going to use except for sodium. What they did here is they just took this number, which is your value, divided by your DRI goal and got a percentage here. What we're looking for is anything that is basically below 75%. So you notice my vitamin D and E is below 75%. It was only 41%. Okay. Well, what do I need to get it to be 100? Well, 15. So your goal is to get an average of 15. Okay. So what you would do then is go through each day, make adjustments. Hopefully you can make serving size adjustments within the food you normally eat. But possibly some of you are going to have vitamin D or E levels of maybe 5%. So it'd be impossible to make realistic adjustments to your food intake to get up to where we need to be. So you're going to have to add food. So you're going to have to find foods that you may not normally eat to to get this up to 41% or get this up to 100%. So what you have to do is, like vitamin E, you probably have to add some oil. Maybe for cooking, you'd say I'd add a teaspoon of olive oil for cooking. So that would add some things or something like that. Vitamin D, probably have to add some dairy. But I would, you can't add supplements. I would really hesitate to add like a power bar to get these, because power bars are basically just a vitamin mineral supplement that's added to some oatmeal and stuff. So I would try to pick real foods, because again, one thing we're looking at, not, I mean, the underlying thing we're looking at is not just the nutrients, but the phytochemicals. So if you're just taking a supplement, obviously, there's some foods you're not eating that possibly would have some phytochemicals you're not getting. So the best choice would be try to get foods that are high in these, that are not supplemented. Um, and so try to find real foods that you would eat that would be high in these, that instead of a power bar, or instead of a diet aid like a Ensure or something like that. They're basically just got minerals and stuff added to them. Try to find real foods, right, that are natural kind of things that you would use to increase these. But so you're just looking for the below 75%. So in my case, in these cases, I wouldn't make any change. I wouldn't have to do anything. Here I would have to make adjustment. Down here 60, I would have to make adjustment of potassium, but otherwise I would be fine. The only thing you would have to do with these is you would need to just list the top 3 foods. So you'd make no changes here, but you'd make changes here. Okay. Now for sodium, a different story. Your sodium, if it's over 100%, I need you to reduce it, because we're looking at hypertension. So in my case, I was at 290%. So I need to lower this to 1300 is what my DRI goal is. So that's what you would do with that. And so again, you just go through and adjust foods until your average was 1300, and then again use the proper format for listing day 1, day 2, day 3, original intake, changes, new intake, and then show that you met the goal. Fiber. Okay, our fiber, we're going to be using that 75% rule, is that if you're below 75%, then you need to get it up to the 100% rule. Okay, so again, these obviously are wrong, and so but we are going to use this number here. This is your normal intake. This is your goal, so this would be your goal. In my case, I was over 75%, so I didn't have to make any changes to my total. But we're still concerned, if you remember, when we got to in the carbohydrates, what we taught, or I can't remember if you haven't got there yet. We will teach that our goal for someone who doesn't have a medical problem or anything is a ratio of 3 to 1 insoluble to soluble. So even though I met my goal, DRI goal, I don't know if I met the goal of a 3 to 1 ratio. Okay, so you're going to have to determine, from I should go back. So this is under, if this was below 75%, this is what I would have to reach. So the way I'm going to reach it, though, is I'm going to make my insoluble and soluble meet their ratios, and then I won't worry about the total. As long as I meet my ratio, I'll be fine. So in my case, if I had 36 grams of fiber is what my DRI goal is. And so what I would do is I want 3 to 1 ratio, which is basically 75%, 25% ratio. So I would just take 36 times 70. So I would want a goal of 27 grams of insoluble and 9 grams of soluble. So again, this is going to be, you're going to go into your spreadsheets and look under fiber, and you're going to have to separate out the soluble and insoluble. We're going to use this chart. This chart you find at the end of the carbohydrate PowerPoints. So you go there and look at the very end, and you'll see this chart here. We are going to say that anything that's a fruit, an oat, or a legume, so legumes are beans, like pinto beans or navy beans, not green beans, but chili beans, those kind of things. We're going to say that those are water soluble. Okay, you and I know that they have both, but we're just going to classify those as soluble because if you were told to increase your soluble fibers, you would increase these foods. Okay, and then these are the ones that we're going to consider insoluble. Okay, so what you would do is go into your fiber column and you are going to then determine how much by looking at the foods similar to the protein, which ones are high in soluble, which are insoluble. Well, we know Cheerios are made out of oats, so we know they're high in soluble. Bananas are fruits, so they're high in soluble. And then peaches are high in soluble. Okay? Um, so we add those up and we get 10.1 grams of soluble. Just subtract 25.46 minus 10, we get 16 grams of insoluble. Okay? Um, so this is where we are. So we would do that for day 1. We would do that for day 2, day 3, get our average, and then determine if we met the 27. So our goal is to get this at 27 and this at whatever I said up here, 9. Okay, so that's our goal, is to do that. All right. So and then the same format, you're just going to separate them out. Give me the top 3 foods that you ate that were soluble and insoluble, and then go from there. All right. And then based on your summary, basically is just what did you learn? Okay. Do you need to increase your plant intake? Do you need to increase your vitamin D? Do you need to decrease your animal protein? What are some things you learned from the study? Okay, and then at the very end you would say how much you love this assignment, that you thanking me for having done this because without it you would have not known as much, and so you are intending to do this over and over and over again because it changed your life. Okay. Okay, anyway. Yeah, so hopefully that helps. Again, I'm available if you just can't quite get the calculations. You're welcome to send me uh, a rough draft of your, like your carb, say maybe start with your carbohydrates, do a rough draft and send it to me. Say, am I on the right track? Am I doing this correctly? And I'll look at it and I'll say, yeah, you're on the right track, or no, you did this calculation wrong or something. Okay? All right. Well, good luck.